G'day Trailblazers, my name is Cam. Welcome to the second lesson in the Introduction to SQL in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. In today's lesson, we're going through the syntax of SQL and how to write some basic query statements in Automation Studio. In our first lesson, we covered off all the theory of how databases work with tables, fields, records, and your data. Today, we're putting all that theory into practice. So if you haven't gone through and watched lesson 1, make sure you pause the video now and go back and check out lesson 1, as we will be using some of the data that we built at the end of that lesson. Now we'll put the links to the GitHub and of course the database diagram in the description below for you to check out as well. So with that, let's get started now doing some SQL in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So when it comes to SQL in Salesforce Marketing Cloud, there really is just one place to do it, and that's Automation Studio. You can of course get there by hovering over the blue cloud in the top left hand side, scrolling across to Journey Builder, then Automation Studio. I've gone ahead and created a folder for today's learnings called Introduction to SQL, and I'll be using this as my working folder for my automations. Now to start off with, an automation of course is just a series of various activities. It's the SQL activity that we're going to be working with as you learn SQL. Now we can go through and explore activities by going to the Activities tab and go into our SQL items, but to make things easier, I'm going to show you how you can do this really quickly so you can learn and get feedback and results straight away. What we'll do is create a brand new automation. So we'll go new automation and we'll call this one our Introduction to SQL. And we'll go done to save it. We'll of course have to make sure that we enable our send once function by going to our schedule at starting source and dragging it onto our starting source. And now we can of course see our run once is enabled. And of course, we'll have to put in some SQL activities. We can see here our query activity. If we scroll down, it's just here, the SQL query. We can drag and drop that onto our canvas here, which creates our brand new SQL query, which we can use to learn SQL. So to start with, we've got obviously a blank activity here. Let's choose an activity to use. And of course, all I have here is my existing queries. We're going to be making a brand new query. So let's go create a new query activity. And here it is. Let's call this one Query 1. So for our first query, we can go next, and straight away, we're here. We can start to write SQL. Now, the thing when it comes to writing SQL in Marketing Cloud is you need to have a destination to put the results into. You can use the Query Studio to test your own results, but I find the results are much easier to use with Automation Studio and with the query activity. It also means you can see your query, save the results, and use them later on. They won't get deleted. So what we first need to do is have a use case to learn some SQL today, and also have a data extension to put our results into. So to start with, I'm going to go back into my Email Studio with another tab here, and back onto our Learning Data Extensions, our 8 data extensions for our bookshop. Now for today, let's start by writing a really simple query to copy some data from one data extension to another. And what better place to start than our customers data extension. So we're going to make a new data extension to save our data into. So let's go, of course, and create a new data extension, a new standard data extension, of course. And let's choose to use an existing data extension. I'll choose existing. I'll navigate down into the folder where we have our tables stored in my learning folder here. We're going to copy the customers data extension, go OK. We'll call this one our Query 1. Just like that. And of course, we can leave it as sendable and testable. That's fine. And we'll go next. We won't use the data retention at this time, so we'll go next one more time. And here is our fields. And as you can see, because we copied that customer data extension, it's kept all the same field names and data types. And look, there's our primary key and nullable and other fields here too. So we'll leave this exactly as it is, as you would have created it from our the example information. And then we'll go create to build this data extension. Hopefully we see. Bing, it's created. Now, of course, if you already have a data extension called Query 1 in your instance, you may have to call it something else, but that's okay. Just remember what you called it. I'll be calling mine Query 1. Now, with this in mind, obviously this data extension is now empty. There are 0 rows in it, but we do have all the structure that we need to put data in it. So 0 rows, but here are our fields, and here is our data types. We are simply going to copy the data that exists at the moment in the SQL customers data extension and directly copy and paste it into the Query 1 data extension. We can do that with some SQL. So we'll jump back in to Automation Studio, back into our brand new query, let's start to type out the SQL needed to copy our data. Now, when it comes to SQL syntax, there is one word you should all learn to start with, and that is the select word. The select word, of course, is written like this, and you'll see as soon as you type out a keyword in SQL, it changes the color. You can see their select goes from black to blue as soon as the word is completed. That's a way of saying that the syntax is now complete and that keyword has been entered. Now select, just like the word implies, is going to be selecting some data. But what data are we going to select? Well, of course, we want to select the data that we need to copy from the customer's data extension into our Query 1 data extension. There's a little trick we can use inside of Salesforce Marketing Cloud. We can go new line. We can then navigate in our folder structures here to our source data extension. What are we selecting? Well, we're going to be selecting our customers, right? You can find our data extension like that, hover over the name, then drag and drop the name like this into our selection fields here, and there's all the fields from our data extension. I can check it out, go into my customers. I can see here that all those fields are matching up. We've got customer ID, first name, surname, email address. Customer ID, first name, surname. Perfect, it's all there. So these are the fields. We're going to be selecting these fields. Now at this stage though, this is the only information that we have in this query, is we're going to select these fields. But where are we going to get these fields from? Well, of course, we know we're going to try and get them from the SQL customers table. So our next keyword is from. We're going to select some fields from a table. Now I like to specify tables using these square brackets. There are other ways, but today I'll be teaching you how to use square brackets. So we put little square brackets like that. In between them, we write out the table name. So SQL underscore customers. Easy as that. Now, one thing to notice, you will see that these fields here have a comma between them. It's a comma separated array or list for the fields to select. Now, we don't need a trailing comma at the end of our statement here. If we click on the Validate Syntax button here to make sure that our SQL code is written correctly, it's going to tell us we don't need this trailing comma. That's a whoops, there's an incorrect syntax here. If we remove that trailing comma, which we don't need, and try again, it's going to say, we're looking okay. Just heads up though, there is no where clause. We're going to return all the data from this table. We are selecting these fields, all the fields, from this table. No conditions, no criteria, get all the data and put it somewhere, which is of course what we're going to try and do for our first query. So we've selected all the fields from our data extension, we're ready to go. So we'll go next. We can progress to our next page here, which is of course the target data extension, where we're going to put the data. We've selected it all. Where is it going to go? Well, we go back and we navigate through to our learning folder again, and query 1 was our destination. So I'll choose that destination. Now says the selected data extension, our target to put the data in, is the query 1 data extension. We can always check to make sure that I just made this data extension and it has the right number of fields and there are no current rows in it, which of course there are no current rows because we just made that data extension. Now finally, of course, is our data action selection here. We have 3 ways of getting data into data extension. We can choose to append it just to add new data. We can choose to update it, which updates existing data, and there's no records that are matched and found, it's going to add a new one. Or we can say replace. Delete whatever you think you've got. I've got new data coming in, remove the old stuff, and put this stuff in instead. Now I like to use the overwrite function, particularly since there are no records there right now. It also ensures that all of our data picks up from our source and goes directly into our destination. There's no chance of adding or duplicating or updating existing records. We're just going to lift and shift to copy and paste our data into our new data extensions. We're going to choose overwrite and then go next. So here's our summary, selecting these fields from this data extension and putting it here. Perfect, let's go finish. With that done, we now have our completed query. What we should do now is of course save our automation with our one query in it. Once we do, we can now see that our run once function is eliminated. We can now choose run once. What we'll do is we'll click that now, which allows us to then choose what activities to run. I'm going to choose this one to run the activity. It then gives us a summary here. You want to run this activity? Yes, we do. So I'll go run now. With that done, it's now going to start the activity. And here's the reason why I suggested we do this inside of an automation in Automation Studio and not inside the activities area. Because we built this as an activity in an automation, we have access to the reporting of this query. So we can jump into the Activity tab and see how it's going. Now, it hasn't started just yet. We can then refresh this page and see when it does start. It'll let us know with a little diagram when the activity has begun to run and how it's progressed. Has it succeeded or failed? So hopefully we'll see it kicks off in a second, and there it is. It's just started to run. Now I can hover over it and see the status here as well. It is in fact running this query. I can refresh the page, and hopefully soon we'll see that query has completed. We'll have all of our data to have a look at. Now, one thing to mention too, while this is running, we can go back to our data extensions and have a look at our learning folder, and we can see the total row count. Now, at the moment, our query 1 has 0 rows. We go back into our automation and refresh it. It's still running. Hopefully soon we'll see that it will be completed, and then we can jump back in and see some updated rows. We can also refresh our data extension view here by clicking on the learning folder again on our left-hand side. That's where my data extensions are stored, of course, refreshing this screen to see our record count. Now again, there's nothing in there just yet. It must still be running. So refresh again, and it's still running. And just a few seconds later, 59 seconds in fact, and the SQL has finished running. We can see it's now been completed. What this now means is we can jump back into our email studio on our data extensions. We did have 0 records. If we now refresh it by clicking on that folder, we should see our new record count, which is 50. Perfect. But what was the original count? We can find our customers, and the original count was 50. Great. So we've now lifted and shifted our 50 records into our new query location. We can jump into our query 1 and make sure that all the data made its way across. We can go into our records tab here and make sure it's all come across. Looking good. All those fields have been populated. Very nice. So back over in Automation Studio, let's go back onto our workflow, and we can now edit that SQL query to go through and learn some more SQL syntax. Now, as you saw a second ago when we edited this query for the first time and clicked the View Syntax, it gave us a little warning. It said to use a where clause to filter rows returned by your query. Now, of course, that was just a heads up. We didn't want to filter our data. We wanted to lift and shift 100% of the data from one data extension to the other. But now, let's learn how to filter our data. What about looking back at our data? If we just wanted to make a data extension of all of our customers whose bookworm status is linen tier. Well, we could do that by, of course, using a filtered data extension. You can always do that. But what about an SQL? Well, we can do that by using the where clause, where the bookworm status is equal to linen. So how do we type that out in SQL? Well, we can go back in to our SQL, back onto our query here. Let's start to type it out. So I'll zoom in a little bit just so we can see our screen a little bit better. Let's now type out our where clause. So from our SQL customers table, we want to select all those fields where, and watch, once we type in where, it goes blue, which of course means it's now a keyword. Where what? Well, where a field is equal to a value. So where our bookworm status is our field, is going to be equal to a value. And what's our value? Well, if we have a look back onto our data, it was the bookworm status of linen tier. Let's try and find out how many customers have the linen tier. So we'll copy the word linen. We can go back into our SQL and paste it. Now, one thing though, linen is a text. It's a string. If I go validate syntax, it's going to say, whoa, there's no column called linen. What are you talking about? We have to tell SQL that linen is actually a text string we're trying to search for. So we use the single quotation marks around the word linen, which actually turns out a little green color. We now go validate syntax, which should now say, yep, looking good. We're going to try and find all customers with all these fields in the SQL customer data extension where their book status equals linen. So our syntax is valid. We can now move on to our next one by going next. And of course, we're going to overwrite and back into that same query again. Very importantly, like in our query, we're still picking up all of the SQL customers data from the original data extension. We're just going to replace our results in the query 1 data extension with these new results. We're going to overwrite the previous 50 records with whatever this new count is. We'll soon find out. So we'll leave it as it is. We've got query 1 selected and of course overwrite selected. So we'll go next. There's our summary and we'll go finish, which means we are good to go. We will save our automation. And then once again, we're going to run once our activities again, choosing run once, choosing our one activity, and then going run. And after just a few seconds now, it must have been only a few seconds because the average is now just 31 seconds, we have a completed query. So once again, we can jump back into Email Studio, go back to our folder. As it refreshes, we should see the new count. And query 1 only has 29 records, not 50 like the original. So these must be all of our linen tier customers. Let's have a look back in our records and all tier linen. Perfect. If you're ever not sure about the quality of your SQL or how you've written your code out and you want to check the data for yourself, you can always go back and make a filtered data extension as well. Or copy the word linen. You can always go back into our learning data extension folder. We can go back to our customers data extension and we could always filter and try it for ourselves using a filter where the bookworm status is equal to linen. We can save this and call this one query 1 filter. And let's see if the filtered data extension has the same result. Now, a fun trick too, if you're not too sure how to write the syntax in SQL to achieve your desired results, you can always do a filtered data extension using the GUID like we've just done, and you can see how it's written out. As you can see, the bookworm status is equal to linen. And luckily, again, 29 records was the same as we got for the query 1 in SQL. 29 records, looking good. If I jump in now to my SQL customers data, I can have a look and see for myself that the bookworm status is their tier status for their points. Now, linen tier appears to be higher than the craft tier, but it's also lower than parchment tier. So you can see that linen must top out at about 500, and then parchment is for 500 points and above. So what about writing a query now that can select our customers that are getting close to the parchment tier? We want our linen tier customers that have, let's say, more than 400 points, and therefore getting close to their new upgrade to the parchment tier. We can write this as well using some SQL. Let's now jump back into Automation Studio and write out a query to just select our top performing linen tier customers. So we'll jump into our query here. We can see we've already got our first piece. We'll go edit. And we can see that our bookworm status is equal to linen, but we want some more criteria. So how do we type this out? Well, we've already got our first where clause. We can add a new line if you want to, and then put and. You can see it goes in blue. That's our new criteria there for our new keyword, and something else. What's our other criteria? Well, back into our data extension, and we're lucky because we've stored this data in a really good way. Jump onto our properties. Our status for our bookworm status was, of course, a text field. We chose that text, but the points is numeric. It's a number field, and that means we can use those logical operators, the greater than, less than, or equals to. So back into our records, then we could say whether bookworm points is greater than 400. And that gives us any customer that is the linen tier and above 400 points. So in this example, we should definitely see Andrew coming through at 402 points, but unfortunately, Amanda has less than 400 points, and so she should not be on that new record. Let's have a look now back in Automation Studio, back into our SQL, and we can say, and the bookworm points. Now we could go back into our data extension, back into our properties, and copy the name here. We could also go back into our SQL, and we could open up that data extension by going into our learning. We could find our customers, and we could open up by extending this tab here and finding our bookworm points and dragging and dropping that. You can see it even shows the data type on the screen, straight in like that, remove that comma. We can then say where the bookworm points is greater than 400. And because 400 is a number, it knows that it's a number. And it doesn't need to have that quotation mark put around it because it is the numeric value of 400. But that done, we can of course check our syntax, make sure it's okay. Looking good. So with that, let's go next. We'll of course replace our existing data by using overwrite again back into our query 1 data extension as we've done before. Go next and finish. With that done, we'll once more save our automation and run once, choosing to run our query 1 activity. And again, just seconds later, we're now down to an average of 22 seconds, we have our another query completed. So let's jump back into our data extension, back into our learning. Let's have a look at our query 1 data extension. Oh, only 8. We had 50 customers, only 29 were linen through our filter, and in our query 1, our most recent one now shows only 8 records have more than 400. Well, let's check it out. We'll go in and check out our records to make sure that our data has come through correctly. And what do you know? We can order our data because it is numeric, and we can see anything that's above 400, but of course has not made it all the way to the parchment tier with 500 points. Fantastic. So 8 records in total. I hope you get the same records as I did. Back over on the automation once more, I'm going to take you through one more piece of syntax before we close out lesson 2. If we jump back into our query, we'll edit it one more time. I'm going to show you the ordered by and the top functions. So let's pretend that our actual brief was to choose our 5 most likely customers to get up to that parchment tier. Now we don't know, our database could be tens or hundreds of thousands of records in size, so we don't know exactly who the top 5 closest to parchment tier will be. We do know that going above 400 is a good safe starting bet. We've just tested that, we know it works. But we just want the top 5 closest to parchment, the 5 who are closest to 500 but have not quite made it there. So we can do a little bit more with our syntax. Now our data as it was right now was being selected in the order that it's currently saved in the data extension. It queries how it was saved and reproduces that same data in the same structure. But we can tell the SQL to order that data. So I could say select all of our fields from our data extension where linen is the tier and where their point status is above 400, and we could then choose to order by. We can choose to order by a field. Well, let's order by our points. We can order by our points and order by points descending, DESC, and there you go, it goes blue to let us know that that's actually a valid keyword. Now, since it is points descending, it will choose the highest point value first and the lowest last. We don't need to specify that's above 400, so we'll automatically choose any customer that is linen tier, finding the highest point total first. So you can remove that secondary condition there and leave it as just where tier is linen. So we could then go validate syntax. There's one more thing we have to do. You can see here that the new help clauses here in SQL and Marketing Cloud are much more helpful. It tells us what's gone wrong. And it tells us here that the order by clause requires an additional expression. We need to provide some information at the top of our query to offset or use an XML specified table. So for today, I'm going to show you the top function. So what we can do is we can say, well, we're selecting all this data from this table. That's all fine. We're going to select just the top 5 records, so those 5 most likely customers to convert to our parchment tier. So selecting the top 5 records. And try again, and this time it says OK. We should be able to select our top 5 customers who are linen tier, ordered by their points, descending. Top points first, lowest points last, descending order. So with that done, let's now go next. We'll jump in and we're going to overwrite once more time, overriding our query 1 data extension. We'll go next and finish. And as before, we'll save our automation and run our activity. Now, while this runs, we'll go back and check our data and see if we can find out who those 5 records should be before the query finishes. So we'll run query 1 just like this. We'll go run and run now. And while that's running, jump back and have a look for ourselves. So we ordered the data ourselves. And it should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just these 5 records is who should come back. We should not see Scott, Daniel, or Andrew. It should be Ruth, Mary, Jason, Christopher, and Jennifer. They come back as our top 5. Now, of course, we can visually see our top 5 here, but we're going to try and extract this data and give it to our sales manager or to our event staff. They'll want just those 5 records. So learning how to do a top 5 function that we've just done is really helpful for limiting those segments for other business users. So we'll jump back into Automation Studio, check out the activity, and completed. Perfect. So back into Email Studio, we'll go back to our folder. We had 8 records originally for query 1, and what do we have now? 5. Beautiful. Go into our query 1, and what do we say? It was Mary, and I think it was a Jason and Jennifer. Ruth, Mary, Jason, yep. Those are our records. So as you can see, the syntax of learning how to read SQL is actually really, really easy. It's very logically written out. You can almost speak it out and see what it's doing. We are selecting the top 5 records with these data points from this table where the data of bookworm status is equal to linen. We want to order that data to get our top 5 from the points value descending. As you can see, it's really easy to speak it out and to see what it's trying to do, which makes it a really easy language to learn as well. And that brings us to the end of Lesson 2 in our Introduction to SQL in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. I hope you've enjoyed learning the basic syntax and how to write out the select, the where, and the order by functions. If you enjoyed today's content, then please let me know with a big thumbs up. Make sure that you are subscribed to the channel so that you are notified when I release Lesson 3 in our Introduction to SQL.